All right, well, thanks for joining us, everyone. So I'm Dr. Rebecca Mears with VIN and VIN Foundation. Really excited to be joined by Suveto today as well. Thanks for helping us to put this on, and we're going to have Tony Bartels walk us through all you need to know about student loans and repayment and
Mm,
what's going on in
mm,
that world right now. A couple of things before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. We will try to keep the chat open for any technical issues throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions for Tony or the conversation, please ask those in the Q&A, which you can find that button down at the bottom of your screen. You do have the option to ask questions anonymously through the Q&A, and you can also upvote questions, and that way we can see kind of what are the most pressing questions that have a lot of upvotes, and we can make sure to ask those live. If you're joining us today live and looking for CE, we will have a link to send out as well if you complete that evaluation, and then you'll get an email regarding your CE certificate. And then also keep out an eye for a follow-up email either later on this week or early next week with a copy of the recording. We will have a copy of the recording. We'll have answers to some of your questions and some other really helpful things as well. So keep an eye out for that. That'll come from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And with that, I'm going to get us kicked over to Sarah to say a couple of words.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Dr. Mears. I just want to go ahead and welcome everyone. This is our Suveto hosted event along with the VIN Foundation, Climbing Mountain Debt, Navigating Your Student Loans and Repayments. So thank you all for joining. My name is Sarah Tash. I'm the program manager here at Suveto for the Learning and Development team. Just want to say thanks for attending this session this evening. I know we're coming across from all different time zones, so it could be late for some of y'all, could be a little early. Like Dr. Mears said, there is going to be that recording if you have to drop out, all of that good stuff. We want to make sure you get caught up on the conversation. I also do want to thank VIN Foundation for putting on this webinar for us and then all the work they do for the veterinary space. So before we kick it off, I do want to introduce our awesome speaker this evening, Dr. Tony Bartels. He graduated in 2012 from Colorado State University combined MBA and DVM program. He's also an employee of the Veterinary Information Network. He and his wife, a small animal internal medicine specialist, practice in Denver, have more than $400,000 in veterinary school debt that they manage using federal income-driven repayment plans. By necessity, and now his obsession, his professional activities include researching and speaking on veterinary student debt and providing guidance to colleagues on loan repayment strategies and contributing to VIN Foundation resources. Beyond debt, his professional interests include small and exotic animal practice. So we're super excited to have Dr. Bartels joining us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to him.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for setting the ground rules for us, Rebecca. And we're going to dive in. We've got a lot to cover. There's been so many changes that have taken place. It's been really hard to keep up, but we just keep doing sessions like this, and we learn more as we go, particularly as interest has started and payments have started back up, and what the loan servicers have been up to and or not up to, depending on your student loans. So this is a great opportunity to inform you all on what we've learned from the veterinary community, as well as through our own experience helping veterinarians work through their student loan challenges with all of the changes and trying to set yourself up for kind of what next is, right. You know, we've got this kind of immediate need to understand what's happening with our student loans right now. Do I need to take advantage of some of the changes that are happening in a certain amount of time? And then once we can kind of digest that short-term need, we can look more towards the long term. What does this mean beyond the next year? And, you know, what if my income changes, or I want to buy a practice, or I want to buy into a practice, or whatever, you know, I want to start a family, or I'm having another kid and taking some time off. With some of the primary complaints or concerns that you all submitted with your Zoom registration, those are things that are inevitably going to happen, and we want to make sure that you can work those into your student loan repayment strategy as need be. And then also kind of the elephant in the room is forgiveness, right? So what's up with forgiveness? What, you know, how do I plan for that? Is it really going to happen? And what is that going to look like with all the current changes that have been taking place? So we're going to dive in here. Feel free to ask questions along the way. You don't have to wait until we reach the end. We've got a couple of different screens, and we've got a team here of folks that are going to help us make sure we don't miss any questions along the way. But here's in a nutshell what we're going to try to cover tonight, right? So you can't manage what you don't measure. Knowing your debt and repayment options is extremely important, and especially as it's been a bit of a moving target, trying to see, what am I eligible for? What repayment plans am I currently using? And I still find a lot of confusion on that, right? So, and that was before there were a lot of changes, and it's never been more important now to know what plan am I actually using, right? Because if I don't know, it's really hard to process what the changes are, right? Because for some of us, the changes happen automatically. And for others, you have to actually opt in if it makes sense for you to switch repayment options going forward. You want to match your repayment strategy to your finances. This is probably the most important part of it, right? So how do I know which repayment option is best for me? It's really going to depend upon your student debt to income ratio. What is your student debt balance? What is your income? What is your income likely to do? How close or how far away are you from potentially reaching student loan forgiveness? Those are all the variables that play into that equation in terms of determining which repayment strategy is going to work best for you. Whether or not you're married, that's a big one, right? So we're gonna cover that as well, because that really tends to throw people for a loop. Especially when it comes to your student loans. So that can play a significant factor in what your repayment strategy will be in the short term and long term. Checking your loan servicers. This is a new one, right? The loan servicers, my experience, the experience that we've been kind of tracking with the veterinary community, who have been asking Rebecca and I lots of questions over the summer and particularly this fall, the loan servicers have been absolutely terrible. So, I guess to be expected, but maybe not to be expected to the extent that they've been as terrible as they have been. But, turning off this $1.6, $1.7 trillion system on and off like a light switch was going to be challenging, but the loan servicers have really not made this any easier. So you really have to stay on top of them. In my experience, they've been making lots of mistakes. They've been calculating the payments wrong. They've been getting your anniversary dates mixed up, and maybe processing income information that they had on file for you that they shouldn't have been using. So, you really have to log in, check what they are showing you, check what access you have to your federal student aid data so you can compare and contrast, and then unfortunately pencil in some time to call them and make some corrections if they've made some mistakes on your student loans. That's some of the side effects that we'll talk about, but there's also other side effects no matter which repayment strategy you're going to choose. And we'll finish it up weaving it in to your financial wellness strategy, since we can't separate out student debt without talking about your overall financial wellness plans. We do try to treat these clinically, right? So we're going to do a physical exam and diagnostics. I'll walk you through some of the tools that we've spent a long time building and refining on the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center. And then from what we find in there, we're going to talk about prescriptions and treatment plans, right? So based on that information that we can see in our student aid data file, what is it telling us? What do we need to do next? And if you do need help, we've got a number of different ways for you to receive that, but pretty much any veterinarian has access to personalized student debt assistance via the VIN and VIN Foundation student debt message board area. So we've got a link there in terms of the process for getting that started. And we're going to walk through what some of that looks like this evening. Some of the concerns that you all submitted during the Zoom registration forms, these are pretty common, right? Depending on where you are in repayment, what your experience has been with your student loans, how long have you been in repayment, how long do you have to go, how does it generally feel, how does it sit with you? These are all things that are, we're going to layer into what we find on your physical exam and build into your treatment plan. How fast should you be paying off your student loans? That's going to really depend on what your income shows. I'm hesitant to ever buy a house or move on with the rest of my financial wellness until I take care of my student loans. Unfortunately, paying back a veterinary education size student debt balance is a in some cases, decades-long endeavor, right? So we can't really afford to hit the pause button on things like starting a family or buying a home or buying a practice if that's on your list or buying into practice ownership. We're going to have to figure out a way to do that all simultaneously, right? And good news is that we can do that, right? The income-driven plans help do that, but again, it depends on your debt-to-income ratio in terms of whether that's going to be a good fit for you or not. Keeping your monthly payment as little as possible, that kind of screams income-driven plan to me, right? Unless your debt-to-income ratio is less than 1, in which case a more traditional repayment strategy might work better for you. But when people say they want to keep their payment as low as possible, that usually involves an income-driven plan, particularly the newer plan called SAVE, or Saving on a Valuable Education is the long-form name of it. Making payments without compromising lifestyle, again, that kind of falls into that same realm, right? How do I walk and chew gum at the same time? How do I address this student loan elephant while also having a financial wellness strategy that involves things that don't have me contributing all of my available funds towards my student loans? Also, why does interest have to be 7%? Well, I'll leave that one to you, right? So, I mean, when you think about student loans, they're not all at 7%, depending on where you went to school, when you went to school. They've been kind of fluctuating for students that are graduating or just about to graduate, they're even lower. But for students who are starting veterinary school right now, they're going to be really high, right? So, but think about it, these are $100, $200, $300, $400,000 in student loans to people that otherwise don't have any credit or assets. Right? If that person came to you and you had the funds to offer them, what would be the interest rate that you would offer them? Right? So think of it that way. 7% definitely seemed like it was a lot higher when interest rates were at 0 to 3%, but now 7% is a good deal on a mortgage, right? So it's kind of weird how these things go back and forth when it comes to when it comes to evaluating student debt and why they are the way they are. All right, so a first step in a student loan physical exam is assessing what we're dealing with, right? We got to kind of put our hands on those student loans and see what types do we have, because depending on when you went to veterinary school or your pathway to and through veterinary medicine, you're going to have a variety of different loan types. Most of you are probably going to fall into this direct unsubsidized or direct grad plus category, right? If you borrowed for undergrad, you'll maybe have some direct subsidized loans, but the key is, do they have direct in the name, right? Direct is kind of a family category of loans, a newer, if you will, type of federal student loan, but those tend to have the most beneficial of the repayment options. Some of you, particularly those of you that might have been in higher education borrowing to fund that higher education at any point before 2010, you might have some federal family education loans, right? So this is kind of the predecessor to the direct loan program. The federal family education loans have been a bit of a problem child when it comes to repayment because they're not eligible for a lot of the more beneficial and newer income-driven plans or public service loan forgiveness, and that trips a lot of people up. So thankfully, you can consolidate those, and there's never been a better time to do that than now to get those into the direct loan category so they are more eligible for some of the more beneficial repayment options and strategies. Perkins loans, I still see those floating around on veterinary professional ledgers. Health profession student loans, more so if you attended a state school, I see those floating around. Loans for disadvantaged students, same kind of thing. If you went to a state school and you met the eligibility for those types of loans, you may have those. They are a type of federal student loan, but you have to kind of keep track of them separately. So if you have a loan servicer like Heartland, ECSI, they tend to be the big national organization that services those types of student loans, or they might also be serviced by your school. You might actually be making payments to your school for those loan types. In terms of the pandemic forbearance benefits, unfortunately, they're over, right? So if you just learned that, sorry, but they ended on August 31st, interest started accruing on September 1st, and then payments have been due since this month, right? So depending on what your payment due date is, it's going to trigger at some point this month. Some of you may have already had that payment trigger already. A question that comes up really frequently is, does that time that I was in that pandemic forbearance, whether I was making payments or not making payments, does it count towards forgiveness? And the answer is yes. Right. So you do get forgiveness credit for loans that you had subject to the pandemic forbearance benefit. The only exception to that would be is if you were still in school, right? In school time does not count as forgiveness eligible time. So if you were in repayment or even in, some kind of other forbearance or some other repayment plan other than an income driven plan during that forbearance benefit period, you would be eligible for forgiveness credit for that time. And that's only for federal student loans, right? So some of you may have a combination of federal student loans plus some private loans. Most commonly, I see private student loans that were used to cover undergraduate education, right? Because you're only allowed to borrow up to a certain amount of direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans for undergraduate education. And if you have a need beyond that, you usually satisfy them with private loans. Veterinary school is graduate school and a health profession type of graduate school, so they're not subject to any limits. You can borrow up to what the school says the cost of attendance is. So we don't see private loans for veterinary school too often, occasionally, but very rarely. But any private loans are usually from undergrad. If you've lost track of anything, check your credit report, right? Annualcreditreport.com. That's the best place to grab that credit report. I normally do that when I'm filing my taxes, or you could do that when you're updating your income information for your income-driven repayment plan. If it's time for you to renew or you're switching plans, it's always a good time once a year, peg it to something, when you're filing your taxes, when you're renewing your income-driven plan, whatever the case is, check your credit report at least once annually. You're able to do that for free from the 3 major reporting entities and get an idea of any outstanding loans or past due balances or lines of credit that you have that have been taken out in your name. All right, so in terms of making sense of the federal student loan portion, these are the types of loans that we can find on our typical student loan physical exam that I'm going to show you in just a second here. So we're going to go to studentaid.gov, and I'm going to log in. And there's been a lot of changes made to this platform recently too. So if you haven't been in here in a while, you're going to want to get familiar with it, right? Because this is where we start a consolidation. This is where we apply for or recalculate our income-driven repayment amount, right? So this is a dashboard for doing a lot of things that should be on our radars when it comes to federal student loans. But I can log in here and check and see what my student loans look like. So it's going to send me a code, and this is usually pretty quick. So I'm going to see what there it is. Great. So 954,279. And I would encourage you to do this while we're walking through this, right? Because you're going to want to grab what I call your federal student aid data file. That's what I'm going to show you in here. But there's some other information that you can check that's really helpful, right? So you get to see my share of the household student debt balance, right? So I've got $163,000 of principal, $8,700 of unpaid interest. This has actually changed, right? So that's an indication to me. It was in the 7,000s before. The interest switch has been turned back on, right? So the glory days of the interest being off are over. You can see my loan servicers, Nelnet, they have been horrendous. Unfortunately, they're one of the major loan servicers now, so there's a really good probability that you have Nelnet as well. That's why my due date is December and not October, because they screwed up my payment. It was too high coming out of Repay, being converted to Save. It took me days and hours to get them to correct that. My due date is now December 2nd, so I don't have anything due right now, but they finally will start with what the payment should be in December, which is nice, right? So I wish it would say what it said before, which was the wrong payment amount. So this is interesting to see how that translates from the loan servicer to what my federal student aid portal shows in terms of my loans are technically in an administrative forbearance, which is not a bad thing, right? Administrative forbearance should count towards forgiveness, shouldn't interrupt anything, shouldn't capitalize my unpaid interest. It's used for them to do corrections on their end when something's not quite right, right? So that's not a bad thing. I've had some people post on VIN recently about, hey, what do I do? They got me an administrative forbearance and they're trying to get their loans out of an administrative forbearance. You're just going to have to wait for that to flow through their system until it's ready to be what it's supposed to be. And then those loans will automatically come out of that administrative forbearance. It actually doesn't show that here. If it showed what your plan was, it might show your total payment and the plan that you're actually in, as shown on the federal student aid side of things. But this isn't enough information yet. This is just kind of a high-level overview. So I'm going to go over to the View Details button here. And this is the page that has the button that I'm looking for, right? It's got Download My Aid Data. Right, I'm going to click that. It's going to save a copy of this ugly looking text file to your computing device, right? Save it in this TXT file format. It's got all of your history of your higher education borrowing, not just veterinary school, but any time you took a student loan, even if it was paid off, it's going to have a record of it in there, right? And all of that information is going to be important, right? So save that to your computing device, and then I'll show you where you can put that in just a second. All right, so that's going to be the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, actually. So I'm going to come over here, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour here on how to use the My Student Loans tool. So once you hit vinfoundation.org/student debt center or /my student loans, if you're not logged into VIN, right, so using a username and password that you have for VIN, whether you're still a VIN member or not, if you have VIN or VIN Foundation access, you'll be able to keep track of your progress, as well as have access to the VIN and VIN Foundation student debt message board areas where we provide personalized assistance. Right, so here it doesn't recognize that I'm logged in, so I'm going to go ahead and log into VIN. And then it'll show that it recognizes me while I'm using the student debt center. I'll only have to upload this student aid data file once, right? You can see I've got a few in my account that I, do for other folks when we're looking and reviewing their personalized recommendations, right? So I'm going to, up here, you can see I'm logged in, right? Here's the link to the student debt message board area, right? I'll come back to that in just a second. But in terms of the tools that we use to do what Rebecca and I call a physical exam of your student loans, we're uploading that information here, right? So if you're graduated, you're going to use this box. If you're still in school and still borrowing, you're going to use this middle box. If you're working with a student that maybe doesn't have student loans yet, maybe you're a veterinarian that mentors pre-vets and you want to counsel them on the student loan stuff because they don't know how much your veterinary education costs, you can walk them through the in-school loan estimator. And based on the school that they're thinking about attending, you can actually mimic what borrowing will look like based on current interest rates and the cost of attendance and show them what their graduation student debt balance will be for various schools, right? So in the hopes of maybe steering them to some lower cost options, because it's always easier to manage less student debt than it is to manage more, right? It's possible to manage big amounts of student debt, right? Becca and I walk our colleagues through that every day, right? But it's a heck of a lot easier to manage lower amounts, right? And there's no way to really go back in time. So for those of you that are mentoring those pre-vets, that in-school loan estimator is a really helpful tool in terms of just showing them, right? This is what this looks like if you go to this school versus that school, right? And how does that feel, right? When you see a number that says 350 versus 170, right? So those are things that we try to do too with pre-vets when they ask questions about how borrowing looks for veterinary school. All right, so I've got an example of one of you that registered for the student debt webinar. This is a 2018 grad, right? So uploading that text file that I obtained from the student aid data file from the student aid portal, right? So I can see I've got 11 loans. Here's my principal, the unpaid interest, right? Here's the weighted average interest rate. So the interest calculated across all of those different loan types based on the loan balances, how much interest accrues per month, right? And what the monthly payment is based on what we see in the file, right? So I'm going to hit this show details, right? It kind of gives me an overview of how many loans do I have in here, right? I always kind of I sort by the loan date first, just to see, do I have some older loans in here? I do, but they paid them off, right? They paid them to zero. It looks like they paid them to zero before they started veterinary school, right? So those loans are not going to play a role in our repayment strategy, other than it will help to influence which repayment plan they are eligible for. And I'll illustrate that in just a second. So they started vet school in 2014, right? This is what borrowing looks like for veterinary school, right? If you borrow more than direct unsubsidized limits, they start to fall into the grad plus category, right? Rinse, wash, repeat for every year that you're borrowing. I can see that they're enrolled in the pay-as-you-earn plan, right? So they're in pay-as-you-earn with a minimum monthly payment of $391 per month. Their anniversary date, right? We're going to talk about that. The anniversary date is when you're typically next due to renew or provide updated income information. Right here, we can see that date's in the past, right? And this got adjusted based on the pandemic forbearance benefit, right? So we would add 1 year to this. Right, so this person will have, or should have, a $391 per month payment with their loan servicer. Their loan servicer in this case is Nelnet, just like mine, right? And they wouldn't be required to renew that payment until sometime before July of next year. Right, so we've seen this. This is a pretty common dynamic. We went into the pandemic forbearance maybe with a lower payment because our income at that time was lower. We've since maybe switched jobs 1 or 2 times, or we've gotten a signing bonus, or whatever the case is, we're earning more money. We look at our payment and they're like, wow, that's really low. And the temptation is to provide income information, right? But you don't have to until next July. Keep that lower monthly payment, right? That's going to be really beneficial, right? Particularly from an income-driven plan standpoint. And that's where I'm going to go next. Income-driven repayment eligibility. This is one of the most important tabs in here while we're doing our physical exam of our student loans. Which income-driven plans am I eligible to use, right? And this person, we already know they're eligible to use Pay because they're using Pay-as-you-earn. This is the newest of the income-driven plans. This was converted from revised Pay-as-you-earn. It's now called Save, right? Generally one of the more beneficial repayment strategies. However, it has some differences and things that we need to consider. Also eligible for the newer version of IBR, right? So you're either eligible for the old version of IBR or the new version, right? You can't be both. And this is where the fact that they paid off their undergrad loans before they started borrowing for veterinary school actually made them a new borrower in the eyes of the new version of IBR, which is really beneficial, right? Because and this is going to sound convoluted, but we're going to get to this later. Those folks that are eligible for the new version of IBR can safely use the Save repayment plan when Save will result in the lowest monthly payment, use it for a period of up to 5 years, and they can switch to the new version of IBR and still receive forgiveness sooner rather than later on the same time frame they would have received forgiveness on under Pay-as-you-earn, but they will pay less in total by doing that. Right, so this person eventually will want to abandon Pay-as-you-earn the next time they're due to renew because they have a really beneficial payment right now, then switch to Save, and then before they're in Save for no more than 5 years, they'll switch to the new version of IBR. So they're going to get kind of a taste of all of the income-driven repayment plans by the time they reach forgiveness. Right now, the key there is is it going to make sense for them to do all 3 of them, or will Save ultimately end up being a better repayment strategy in the long run, even though they're going to be in repayment longer than they would be if they stayed with Pay or did that switching strategy that I just talked about, right? And that's where we're going to use the loan repayment simulator to make sense of all of that, right? But the first step is doing that physical exam to know which loans types do I have, right? Which repayment plans do I have? What options do I have? So I know whether or not I have the ability of switching to a plan like the new version of IBR, so I can more safely abandon Pay-as-you-earn, because Pay-as-you-earn is going to get phased out July 1st of 2024. Right. So that's why I say when I say abandon Pay-as-you-earn, because once you leave it, you're not going to be able to get back into it. Right. But in this case, it doesn't matter that much because they have access to the new version of IBR. right? So we can put all of these together like puzzle pieces to benefit the most that we possibly can from these income-driven repayment options available, keep our payment low so we can do those other things that people were expressing in those concerns, right? Buying a home, buying into a practice, starting your own practice, starting a family, right? Taking vacations, saving for retirement, all of these things that are generally considered to be financially healthy, we can do by keeping our loan payment as low as possible based on the available options. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about those options that we do have. They fall into time-driven versus income-driven, right? So time-driven are more of those traditional, conventional type repayment options, like a standard tenure, a fixed tenure strategy, 15, 20, 25 years, or even 30 years. If you have a consolidated loan, we take your principal, the interest rate, the amount of time that you agree to pay that balance back, and we calculate a level payment in most cases to hit that zero balance over that specified period of time, right? So that's how 99% of loans work, right? So your car loan, your home loan, your practice loan are all going to be time-driven type repayment options. You can also pay your federal student loans on a time-driven strategy. The default plan is a 10-year plan, right? So they take your principal, the interest rate, they calculate what the payment would need to be to extinguish that balance in a 10-year time frame, 120 monthly payments, right? That's pretty steep for most veterinary student loan balances, right? Which is why time-driven plans are generally not very favorable for most veterinarians, right? So if we've got a $300,000 balance, which is kind of closest to what we were looking at in our example, at an average interest rate of 6%, to pay that balance to zero in 10 years would require a minimum monthly payment of $33.31 per month. Right. So that's usually a non-starter for most people, right? And chances are, and this is where it gets really interesting, when we look at that total cost, right, $100,000 of interest in that scenario over that 10-year time frame, usually those income-driven plans will have a lower total projected cost, even though they run for a longer period of time, which is really counterintuitive. Right? Generally speaking, the longer you're in repayment, the more you're going to pay in interest. The lower the payment, the more the interest, the more the total cost on a time-driven scale. But on an income-driven scale, that gets flipped upside down. Right? Your payments are based on your income. The minimum can be much lower than this, but the total cost can also be much lower, even though we're talking about 20 and 25-year time horizons. Federal student loans are the only loans, at least in this country, that allow you to pay back a loan on an income-driven basis, right? So the payment is a function of your income, your family size, poverty guidelines, state of residence, tax filing status, a lot of different factors there, right? You also have a lot of different options, right? This is what it looked like about a month ago, right? But now revised pay as you earn got converted to saving on a valuable education, or SAVE. Pay as you earn and the original income driven plan, income contingent repayment, is going to be phased out starting on July 1st of 2024. Right. So anybody who's not using one of those plans on that date will no longer be able to access those plans. If you're in that plan, like our example was, if they choose to stay in pay as you earn, they can keep using it for as long as they want. Right? But once they leave pay as you earn after July 1st, 2024, they will no longer be able to get back. Right? And pay as you earn can still be a really beneficial strategy, particularly if you're not eligible for the new version of IBR. Right? So you really want to know in your student loan physical exam, right? Am I eligible for this new version of IBR, which means I don't have to worry so much about pay as you earn being phased out, right? And I can consider the new version called SAVE, right? Because I still have access to a 20-year forgiveness option under the new version of IBR 2014. And then the old version of IBR, a lot of people were stuck with that because Repay, especially if they were married, wouldn't allow them to separate out their spouse's income. Well, now the change is made to Repay called SAVE does. So all of the income-driven plans now allow you to exclude your spouse's income if you filed your most recent tax return separate from your spouse. So essentially, SAVE has made the old version of IBR obsolete. right? Anyone who's using that old version of IBR should get their loans into Save. Maybe not right away, right? Because we still have this anniversary date thing to contend with. Maybe you're using IBR 2009 because you could get a really beneficial payment and you're not set to renew until sometime next year or maybe even in 2025. Right, you can still keep that payment low until you're next due to renew, but at that point you want to get your loans into that new version, that new repayment option called Save, right? And that's going to depend upon your income-driven repayment options, right? If you see IBR in here, IBR and Save, right, then I want to know what is my income-based repayment monthly payment. Can I get a minimum that's lower than that using Save? If not, I'll keep it until I'm next due to renew, and then I'll switch to Save then. Right, so those are the types of things that we're looking for when we're doing that student loan physical exam, primarily driven off of that borrowing history and the options that you have available in this income-driven repayment eligibility tab. But eventually, nobody should be using the old version of IBR. There's going to be no financial reason to stick with it, right? So the new version of Save, it just makes that old version of IBR obsolete. And then we've got this switching option now too, for those folks who are eligible for the new version of IBR. You can use Save for a maximum of 60 months and still be eligible to switch to the new version of IBR. And that caveat there is really because they don't want graduate school folks like veterinarians to use Save for 19 years and then switch over to the new version of IBR and get forgiveness under the new version of IBR. They might as well just have made that a 20-year plan, which I wish they did, but they didn't. They made it a 25-year plan for anyone with grad school loans. So the compromise there was, we'll let you use it for a little while, but not more than 5 years if you want to receive forgiveness on the shorter time scale compared to Save, which has a 25-year forgiveness time frame for those with graduate school student loans. All right, so how do they calculate these payments, right? So this has been some of the changes that have happened recently too. They take your taxable income, they subtract off an allowance, right? So now we've got different allowances for different plans. The higher allowance is for the Save repayment plan. This is what makes the payment lower or the lowest of all of the income-driven repayment options. And they multiply that by a consistent number, the poverty guideline. So it's pretty much consistent for everybody in the lower 48 states. If you live in Alaska or Hawaii, they have a different table that they use. But this is basically, you know, your taxable income minus some allowance for essential living expenses, let's call it, right? And then we're going to take a percentage of that based on the plan that I'm using, multiply it by our discretionary income to get that minimum monthly payment, right? So if I have a income of $130,000 and I subtract off 225% of federal poverty guidelines for a family size of 1 in the lower 48 states is $14,580. My discretionary income in this calculation is $97,195. I'm going to take 10% of that, right? So there's a lot of information floating around out there between 5 and 10% for the new version of Save. The 10% is for folks with all graduate school loans. The 5% is for folks with all undergraduate loans, right? Veterinarians have nearly all graduate school loans, so I use 10%. It could theoretically be a little bit lower, but most likely it's going to be 10%, right? So it, 10 is a conservative estimate. So use 10. In reality, it might be something a little bit less than that for you, depending on your loan portfolio, but 10 is a really good estimate. So if I'm going to take 10% of that discretionary income and divide it by 12, my income requires me to pay $810 per month, right, under the new version of Save. Comparatively, Pay As You Earn would require me to pay $901 per month, right? So you can see it's not a huge difference, but Save will have a lower monthly payment compared to Pay if you're using the same income and family information. So what does that look like for different incomes, right? And this is where it gets down to how much should I pay towards my student loans? Pay what your income requires you to pay, right? I see a lot of people twist themselves into not saying, well, I'm going to pay $1,500 a month towards my student loans. Okay, well, let's look and see what income is required to generate a payment of $1,500 a month, right? That's $210,000. So if you're earning $210,000, then pay $1,500 a month towards your student loans, right? But if you're not, if you're earning $130,000, right, you shouldn't be paying $1,500 a month towards your student loans, right? Because you don't have to, and you could probably do something better with that additional $700 per month that will have a greater return over the long haul, provided you're being smart with that difference, right? So that's what the income-driven plans teach us, right? Is you don't have to pay more than your income requires towards your student loans. You can choose to, but it may not be a great idea for you to do that, right? So this is what allows you to pay your loans while financing life, right? If you want to save for retirement, you're not sure where you're going to find those funds. If you want to have the down payment for a home, you're not sure where you're going to find those funds. You know, buying into a practice, same, all those things. If you have a chunk of money that's on the table because you're paying a higher amount towards your student loans than your income requires, then stop doing that, right? You can choose to stop doing that. You'll have that difference. And you can use those income-driven plans. You'll either pay the balance to zero or you'll hit forgiveness, right? Either is fine. You just want to know what that looks like if you are going to hit forgiveness, right? And that's one of the big side effects that come with the income-driven plans, is that you can make payments based on your income, right? But if those payments are less than or equal to the interest, you're probably going to have a balance forgiven, right? So how much is that balance going to be at the end? What might that tax be? And that's where people usually hit the eject button, right? I'm not going to do this. I don't want to have to pay a tax in the future, right? That sounds like a lot, a lot to work through. Why don't I just pay those loans off instead? Right. And, the reason why you want to take a second look is because you may end up paying more than you have to, even if you do end up having to pay a tax. Right. And it's not a guarantee that you do have to pay a tax. Right. Right now, there's a tax exemption in place, right, which has opened the door for a tax exemption to be continued potentially into the future. Right. So anybody who receives student loan forgiveness between now and 2025 will not have to pay a tax on that, even if it's not for public service loan forgiveness. Right, so there's been a lot of benefits that have been made, changes that have been made to student loan repayment recently that's going to result in people receiving forgiveness now and in the next few years. They're not going to have to pay any federal income tax on that forgiveness. After 2025, we have to wait and see what Congress is going to do, right? They may choose to extend that into the future, or they may let it expire, right? But right now, I take the approach of, if I'm beyond that 2025 window when I expect to reach forgiveness, then I'm going to plan as if I have to pay the tax, right? Which, what is that tax going to be? Is it a penalty? Is it a discount, right? That's where we can turn to that loan repayment simulator, right? So let's take our information that we uploaded into the My Student Loans tool. We're going to send it over to the loan repayment simulator. Right, it's going to bring over as much information as we can and populate automatically. So when we graduated veterinary school, the principal, the unpaid interest, the repayment plan, it defaults to this in-school deferment, grace period, forbearance, but we know that they're using pay-as-you-earn. So we're going to select pay-as-you-earn as the repayment plan. The average interest rate, right? If you're using auto pay with your loan servicer, they will give you a 0.25% interest rate reduction, right? So we can knock this down to something less than the interest rate that shows in our file. We graduated in 2018. All of our remaining loans are from veterinary school, so we have at least 5 years of qualifying time in repayment. Right? This is a really common set of mistakes that I see people doing when they share simulations with Beck and I in the VIN Foundation student debt message board area, right? They're not incorporating the years in repayment. The years in repayment is a huge variable. And this is one of the things that unfortunately, the Department of Education simulator doesn't incorporate either, at least not yet, right? They're working on knowing everybody's forgiveness count, but behind the scenes here, you do have a forgiveness qualifying amount of time, and it's based on how much time your loans have been in repayment, right? So we know this person has at least 5 years of qualifying forgiveness time, right? So we want to make sure that we include that because that will factor in to the simulation going forward. Right, so there's a maximum repayment period on these loans, on these repayment options, right? So pay as you earn 20 years. If I've got 5 years in repayment already, I have 15 years remaining until I hit forgiveness. Save has a 25-year maximum. If I have 5 years in repayment, I have 20 years before I hit forgiveness. Right, the clock does not start over if you switch repayment plans. Right, the clock doesn't even start over right now if you consolidate your loans, which used to do that. Right, so you want to put the number of years, your best guess of how many years of repayment that you have on your loans in here when you're simulating your repayment. Let's give our person $130,000 of income. Right, the best is to use your recent adjusted gross income in here. Right, that's going to be the gold standard. If you were to provide a tax return for your income documentation, they're going to pull the number right off the AGI line. Right, so adjusted gross income is kind of that gold standard when we talk about income documentation, provided that your current income isn't less than that recent tax return AGI. Right, so but whatever that recent tax return AGI says, for whatever reason, if it's lower than your current income, use it. Right, because it will always be acceptable for documentation for your income-driven repayment plan information. I'm going to leave out the family information in here for now. We can come back to that later. But if you're married, you can put that information in there. If your spouse has student loans, you can put that information in there. All of that's going to factor into your repayment strategy, including dependents that you have now and children or dependents that you may have in the future. Right, that impacts that discretionary income formula. If you're saving towards forgiveness, this is another common mistake I see. If you have a dedicated fund for saving for the tax on forgiveness, enter it in here in the advanced simulator settings, right? That will help you gauge your progress and it will adjust how much the simulator shows you that you need to save going forward if you already have an amount on hand. Let's pretend like we don't for the time being. We'll run this simulation, right? We're going to start working our way down, analyzing the numbers. We can see here that our payment due under $130,000 income for pay-as-you-earn should be $901. We know that it's actually $391, and it's going to be that for nearly another year. Right, so we're already overestimating this simulation based on that fact that our payment is still lower for an additional amount of time. But I'm kind of working my way down, looking to see what are the total costs. I sure as heck don't want to pick a fast strategy here. I'm in the 500s. If I stick with pay as you earn, I'm at 352. I'm looking at save, it's at 397, right? So I probably don't want to pull, I don't want to just use save by itself. And here's where kind of you have to, bend your brain a little bit and just trust me until we have a column in here that shows you what that switching strategy looks like if this person were to abandon pay, switch to save for 5 years, and then switch to IBR 2014, right? That total projected cost is going to be something less than this, right? Because I'm going to benefit from the lower payment under save. There's a 100% unpaid interest subsidy that save also has, which means the government's going to cover all of my unpaid interest. And then I'm going to use that for the 5 years, switch back to IBR 2014. The total projected cost will be something less than this. I don't know exactly what that is yet, but we hope to be able to show that to you guys in the not so distant future. But that strategy is going to be the lowest of the available options on the table for this particular person. Right, so if I'm still anticipating getting forgiveness 15 years from now, right, I can use this as a proxy for how much I need to save for forgiveness, right? And I really encourage people to get started on that forgiveness savings as soon as they possibly can, because those folks have a leg up on this, right? Let's say you even had, $10,000 allocated towards forgiveness already, right? It starts to bring down that amount that you need to save in order to hit forgiveness sooner under a plan like the new version of IBR or Repay as you earn, right? And the more that you have on hand, right, the better that's going to look, the easier that is to navigate, the less stressed you have to be about that potential tax. But you'll also notice that it continues to decrease your total repayment costs. Right? And this is why this is such a worthwhile effort, right? If it was just $5, $10, $15,000 here or there, right? It wouldn't be worth all of this, right? But we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollar differences in many cases, right? In this case here, we're looking at $125,000 difference, right? That's worth your time to look into those different repayment options and potentially investigating the one that's going to be the lowest cost for you. I did have a couple of you ask about public service loan forgiveness. That's a little bit different, right? So there is no tax on that, but it also requires that you're working for an organization that falls into a nonprofit realm. So 501c3 state government type employment, right? But if your employer or your career plans have that on your radar, then public service loan forgiveness can be a really beneficial option for you. It does require you to use an income-driven plan, right? So that has to be your payment plan while you're working for that qualifying organization, but then those payments become public service loan forgiveness eligible payments. And once you've reached 120 of those monthly payments, you can apply to have your loans forgiven tax-free, right? And this is working. Right, there's been a lot of doubt cast on this program, and it was set up kind of clunky in the beginning, but there's been a lot of changes that have been made recently that have made public service loan forgiveness more beneficial rather than less. Right, and we can see that 42 billion has been canceled under public service loan forgiveness for more than 615,000 borrowers just in the last year, a couple of years here with some of the changes that have been made. You never know where your career is going to take you, right? So a lot of the, the more heart-wrenching consultations that we do are folks that, got out of school, started in the private sector, found a dream job in a nonprofit realm, and were throwing a whole bunch of money at their student loans and now find themselves in an opportunity to benefit from public service loan forgiveness. They can't go back in time and get back those payments that they made towards their student loans above what their income required. Right. So just another, reason to not pay more than your income requires. Your student loans are going to go away one way or another. Either you're going to earn so much money that the payment is so high that it's going to hit a zero balance before you hit forgiveness, or you're going to hit forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness. Right. Either is going to be fine. Right. But either of those scenarios prevent you from paying more than your income requires, which means you have more income to use in other areas of your financial wellness and financial planning strategies. Just as an example, I'd like to show this one. This is a colleague who received public service loan forgiveness under the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program, one of those changes I mentioned to improve public service loan forgiveness. But they had more than $430,000 of student loans zeroed out, no tax, just by knowing how the programs work and taking a second stab at public service loan forgiveness after they were denied when the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness benefit became available. Right, so this is working. The surefire way to make sure that you don't reach public service loan forgiveness is to ignore it or pretend like you can't get it. Right, so there are options there. You can reach those milestones as long as you know enough about how these programs work to take advantage of them. All right, questions so far? Kind of give you guys a check in on where I am with my student loans, right? This is how this all started, really. It was just taking a dive into my student loans. I kind of came from a corporate finance background initially, so I thought I was doing all the things I should have been doing to take care of my student loans and make them a non-issue. But life happens, right? Things happen outside of your control. I married a veterinarian as well, and she has even more student debt than I do. Combined, we have more than $400,000 of student debt, right? So we have to figure this out, right? But I'm also not going to let our student debt rule our lives, right? Now, in a weird way, it has become kind of my career, but it doesn't impact our financial planning much. Right, so and it's because we use these income-driven plans, other than the times that I have to correct my loan servicers or take advantage of something new, also checking in on my forgiveness savings plan from time to time. Those are when we check in our student loans. But we started, the 10-year plan wasn't going to work for us. The minimum monthly payment was going to be more than we were earning, right? So we couldn't choose that even if we wanted to. Started with that old version of IBR, switched to Repay when it became available. Then we had the pandemic forbearance benefits, shut payments off for everybody. No interest was accruing. We still get forgiveness time for that, nearly 4 years by the time we re-enter repayment. And by the time we re-enter repayment, we're in a newer repayment plan that has an even lower payment than we had before, right? So all of these things, the trend has been for them to become more beneficial rather than less, right? So the people that run around with their hair on fire, what if they pull the rug out from under me, or how do I know that this is going to be a thing? I mean, the general trend over the last, and I've been in repayment for 11 years now, has been more beneficial rather than less. Right now, that trend could change. We just haven't seen any evidence for it yet. Right. So I'm going to keep on the path following the rules as they're written now and make adjustments accordingly. So in that regard, we're planning and saving towards forgiveness. We're 80% to that forgiveness target with about 14 years to go. This is a snapshot. I updated this today from our forgiveness planning fund. The majority of it lives in a robo advising platform called Wealthfront. So I like to show this just because it gives some context of how this can work. The dotted line is the amount that we contribute. The solid line is the value of that fund. The difference between those two is appreciation, growth. Dollars that don't come out of my pocket to cover that potential tax, which reduces the total cost of my student loans. And given this long savings horizon, I have a longer period of time to weather these ups and downs, right? But I also have a longer period of time for that growth to work in my favor, to compound, which further decreases those total costs of my student loans in the event that I have to use this fund to pay those taxes. All right, actually, I had some questions in there. So just something for you guys to think about, and maybe if you want, you can put it in the chat in terms of why not, because this kind of gets to the crux of how these income-driven repayment options work. Let's say I shared with you that I've got $400,000 of student debt. Let's pretend, just for the ease of math, that this forgiveness savings fund has $100,000 in it. Why don't I just cash out that fund, make a $100,000 payment towards my student loans, so I have $300,000 in student loan balance rather than $400,000, right? Because these are things that people struggle with, right? Or the other variation of this is they want to pay more than their minimum, so they're at least paying the interest that accrues, so they reduce the amount of tax that they have to pay at the end, right? That would be the equivalent of me cashing this out and making a bulk payment. Right, some people, like in our example, we've got somebody paying a $400 per month minimum payment. They're accruing $1,700 a month of interest. Why don't they just pay an extra $1,300 a month so they're not accruing any interest? Right, and the answer is because I'm still going to hit forgiveness. They're still going to hit forgiveness. So I voluntarily paid more towards my student loans than I had to. I may have reduced the tax that I have to pay, but I still have to start a new forgiveness planning fund. So I have whatever amount I need to pay that tax down the road, right? So I'm voluntarily paying more than I have to towards my student loans. It doesn't make a lot of financial sense to do that, right? So better if I'm projected to reach forgiveness, which again, the prevailing winds right now are such that there's a lot of forgiveness time being given out to people that might not have otherwise had it before. Right, we had almost 4 years of forgiveness time granted to everyone over this last pandemic forbearance benefit period. That increases the likelihood that most veterinarians are going to hit forgiveness, even with the increases we've seen in income recently. Right, depending on what your student debt to income ratio is, when you run simulations, you're going to find it's quite likely there is a pathway for you to hit forgiveness. And in that likelihood, the most financially beneficial strategy is to pay the minimum required by your income and plan for that potential tax down the road. Do other things with that money you have left over in your budget to increase your overall household financial wellness and wealth. All right, what questions do you guys have? Did I miss anything in the chat? Let's see. Any questions on what we've covered so far before we dive into some of the strategies? I was kind of surprised in the submissions for the registrations not to see any questions about consolidation. That's going to be one of the bigger things that you're going to want to look into as part of your strategy going forward, right? So when we do our student loan physical exam, I'm looking for two things in here. I'm looking for loan types that don't say direct in the name, right? So if I have those federal family education loans, I've got Perkins loans. If you know you have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students, you can add them in here. If I see loan types other than direct loans, that's raising that flag in my head. This person may want to consider a consolidation. We could also pretend that this person had loans that maybe they didn't pay these off. If they didn't pay these off, and I saw a gap between when they were finished, was presumably undergrad, and starting to borrow for veterinary school. So if they finished their undergrad in 2011 and 2012, and they had a couple of years of payment on older loans before they started borrowing for veterinary school, that tells me they should think about consolidating as well, right? Because there's a really beneficial one-time forgiveness count adjustment that's in place between now through the end of the year, where if you consolidate, your resulting consolidated loan will take the loan with the highest number of qualifying payment. So if we had 2 years of additional payments on these loans from before veterinary school, we would transfer that additional 2 years to our veterinary school loans that already have 5 years. Now I have 7 years of qualifying forgiveness time on my new consolidation loan. I'm 2 years closer to forgiveness. Hitting forgiveness sooner is going to save me thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars on monthly loan payments in the future. Right. So that's one of those things that we're going to talk about as we kind of wind into the second half of this session. All right. So I see a question here from Bianca. Do you recommend the class of 2024 try to get into pay or save? Well, that's a great question, and it's going to be dependent upon some factors that may be outside of your control. Right. So the first thing that I would look towards is the income-driven repayment eligibility, right? So if you upload your student aid data file and you see that you're eligible for the new version of IBR, which most 2024 graduates probably will be, the lion's share of you will, right? So the qualifications for the new version of IBR 2024 is that your first loan was received after July 1st of 2014. Or like in the case of this example, if you had loans from before then, you paid them off before you started borrowing again after that date, right? But we'll tell you whether or not you're eligible for the new version of IBR if you upload your student aid file and you look in this income-driven repayment eligibility tab, right? If that's the case, right, and you're eligible for the new version of IBR, you don't have to worry about pay-as-you-earn at all. Right? You don't have to choose it. You don't have to worry about losing it. You can apply for save, use it for at least 5 years or up to 5 years, and then switch to the new version of IBR. So the new version of IBR and pay-as-you-earn are nearly identical, right? So it's not going to be a big deal if you're graduating in 2024 and you don't have time to get your loans into pay-as-you-earn, because you can still have access to the new version of IBR. Everybody that's graduating in 2024 and beyond, to the extent that they're eligible for the new version of IBR, are going to want to consolidate their loans and get into save, right? Use save for 5 years, no more than 5 years, and then switch to IBR 2014 if it makes sense to do so, right? So you can receive forgiveness sooner. That eliminates that need for pay-as-you-earn. Now, if you upload your student aid data file in here and you see that you're not eligible for the new version of IBR, then, and it makes sense, you're running simulations and pay as you earn as your lowest cost repayment strategy, then you're going to want to graduate, consolidate your loans as fast as possible, waive your remaining grace period, and choose the pay as you earn repayment plan. To the extent that you can do that before July 1st is kind of questionable, right? You can't choose a repayment plan. You can't start a consolidation loan until you graduate and your loans officially enter the grace period. Right now, most vet schools graduate sometime in May, right? Usually that grace period status is reflected shortly thereafter. At the latest, that's June, right? That really doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, right? You would have to start that consolidation loan June, waive that grace period, and choose pay as you earn. Right? And then you're going to have to cross your fingers that your loan servicer is still going to put you into pay as you earn by the time that consolidation processes, because it's probably going to process after July 1st. Right? So it may not be logistically possible for many veterinarians to get their loans into pay as you earn, even if they want to. Right? The earlier you graduate, the easier that will be. Right? But again, if you're eligible for IBR 2014, you don't have to worry about that. Right? Because you're going to want to get your loans into save. You can switch to IBR if it makes sense for you to do so, or you can leave your loans into save. Right? But yeah, that'll be something that we're going to be talking about with the graduating class, particularly as we're approaching that graduation. We usually do what's called a new grad student loan playbook, and that's going to be one of those topics that's going to be high on the list for that new grad playbook for the 2024 class. Right? If you're not eligible for IBR 2014, can you graduate, get your loans into the grace period fast enough in order to consolidate and choose a plan like pay as you earn if it's going to be the most beneficial for you?
Tony,
If not,
another
don't.
question.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There was another question here. You had discussed some of the times when you would want to consolidate. What about instances in which you would not want to consolidate?
I have a consolidate slides set in here that I'll review. But the only instance I can think of when you don't want to consolidate is if you don't have anything to gain by doing so. Right. So let's look at, so this example, this is a good example, right? This person doesn't have anything to gain by consolidating. Right now, if they had these older loans and they hadn't paid them off and they could have gained 2 years of forgiveness time, then it would have been worth it to consolidate. If they had other loans in here that are non-direct loans, depending on how much of that balance in proportion of their overall balance is in that non-direct category, it would probably make sense for them to consolidate. Any time that you can add forgiveness time, any time that you can get loans that are otherwise won't qualify for a plan like SAVE or public service loan forgiveness, you want to consolidate. In the example I just illustrated about the person who might need to graduate, consolidate to get into pay, you definitely want to consolidate. Right? So the only time you don't want to consolidate is if you have nothing to gain from it. And this person is actually a good example. In reality, this person has a very beneficial repayment monthly payment coming out of the forbearance benefits. They're eligible for the new version of IBR, which means they can keep that minimum monthly payment, switch to SAVE if they want to, and then switch the IBR 2014 in the future if they want to get that lowest projected total cost. They don't need to consolidate to do that. It's not going to change the ability for them to do that. Right. So in most cases, the people that reach out to Becca and I would say the majority of them probably do have something to gain from consolidating. Right. But if you're not sure, ask. Right. And that's where we can help sort out those details with you. Right. But if you don't have something to gain by consolidating, then it's just going to be kind of a waste of your time. Right. And this stuff is already confusing enough. You don't have to add more work if you don't need to. All right, the best strategy allows me to reduce the risk to myself and my family, maximize my monthly cash flow, and ideally reduce my total repayment costs. I may not get this last one all the time, right? But that's not really my primary objective. In a lot of cases, particularly as the income-driven plans get better, you're going to see all three of these, right? But I know that I can get the first two all of the time. right? Reduce the risk to myself and my family. My federal student loans, I know if I go out and slip in the snow today and break my neck, right? My student loans, I can have them discharged, right? They're never going to be the responsibility of my family, right? The same goes for my spouse's loans. If something should happen to her, her loans are never going to be a responsibility of me or my daughter, right? That's not the case with a lot of other debt you're going to have, right? So keep those loans in the federal system. There's a lot of real beneficial insurance provisions like that. Maximizing my monthly cash flow, right? And also reducing the risk to myself and my family. With the income-driven plans, not only does it prevent me from paying more than I have to, but if something should happen that alters our income, if our income decreases for any reason, for any length of time, a job move, maternity leave or paternity leave, taking some time off to take care of a sick family member, right? All of those result in income decreases. I can submit to have my payment lowered, all the while I'm earning forgiveness time towards my student loans. And if I'm using a plan like Save, the Department of Education is covering all of my interest, right? So there's all of this really beneficial insurance built into these federal student loans that most people don't even know about, right? So those are a lot of things that you give up if you refinance them, right? So take them out of the federal system, or if you're aggressively paying more than you have to try to eliminate them faster, right? Because I do see people that want to eliminate those loans faster because they don't want them to be a burden on their family, right? In reality, they're never going to be a burden to anyone other than yourself, right? And they don't have to be much of a burden if you peg the payment to your income. And then, oh, by the way, right, in a lot of cases, and you'll see this when you run those simulations, they're going to be the lowest projected total cost, even if you have to pay that tax on forgiveness, right? So run that simulation to see if that's going to be the case for you. Another question I'd like to pose, just a thought process if you want to put something in the chat, or, what happens if you don't pay your student loans fast enough, right? So there's all this kind of, I need to pay my loans back fast. I need to pay them fast. And this is particularly students, right? The earlier you are in the program, the faster you want to pay your student loans back. And then when you hit graduation and, life kind of hits you upside the head, you start to refine that a little bit, right? Oh, well, maybe I can't afford to pay $4,000 a month towards my student loans, right? What happens if you don't pay your student loans fast enough? There was one person who put in one of the primary concerns, they didn't want their student loans impacting their credit. Your student loans don't impact your credit, right? If you're making the minimum payment on time using an income-driven plan, they'll help improve your credit, right? Paying more than the minimum doesn't help to improve your credit, right? So making the required minimum payments on time will actually improve your credit. Right, having a lower payment so you have more cash flow available to you will actually make you look like a better borrowing candidate to the bank if you're going to finance a major purchase like a home or a practice or a car or renting an apartment or whatever, right? So those types of things aren't rooted in reality. And if you don't pay your loans back fast enough, well then so what, right? You'll hit forgiveness, right? So as coming back to that idea before, right? If your loans are going to go away one way or another, either going to earn enough to pay them to zero before you reach forgiveness, or you're going to reach forgiveness. Either is fine, right? Just make sure you're not paying more than your income requires so you have more available to work on other areas of your financial wellness. So after running thousands and thousands of simulations, there's themes that arise. Right? If your starting debt to income ratio is less than 1, you're likely going to pay your loans to zero before you reach forgiveness. And this repay, that should say Save. Right? You can use Save if you want to peg your payment to a percentage of your income. You may even pay it back faster than you would under a standard 10-year plan. But your payment may also be higher than a standard 10-year plan payment. Right? So less than 1, you have a lot of option. Greater than 2, you're likely to reach forgiveness, right? No matter how your income changes over time, unless you have a dramatic increase very early on in the repayment schedule, you're probably going to hit forgiveness. That's what the simulator is going to show you, right? So in those cases, you want to use pay as you earn, Save, or that Save plus the new version of IBR strategy, pay the minimum, plan for the forgiveness, right? Keep on track, make sure that your payments are what they should be, your loan servicers are doing what they should be, and that you're on track with your forgiveness fund if you're anticipating having to pay a tax. So if it were my dog, this is kind of the algorithm that I work through, right? So if you've got a debt to income ratio less than 1, particularly as you're getting started, I would enroll in save or pay as you earn until you reach 0 on that balance, right? It will prevent you from paying more than you have to towards your student loans. It'll give you more flexibility in your budget to work on other things. You can choose to use a standard plan if you want to, that's okay. It's gonna be about the same payment as it will be under save or pay as you earn, but you might have a little bit more wiggle room, particularly as they're just getting started in your veterinary career. Even if your debt to income ratio is less than 1, please don't refinance your federal student loans. They're just way too beneficial in terms of the underlying benefits, the insurance that they provide that a private loan just can't compete with. Right? They can try to offer you a lower interest rate, but in most cases, you have to put somebody else on the hook for that loan when you refinance that, and you don't want to do that, right? And that's that case where if you do that and something should happen to you, your family member is now on the hook for that balance, right? So there's really no good reason. I mean, way back when we were looking at, 2% interest rates, there could be some argument to be made there for those, but we're not in that universe anymore, right? And we're probably not heading to that particular universe ever again. So it's really hard for me to envision a scenario where it ever would make sense to refinance a federal student loan going forward. If your debt to income ratio is greater than 1, particularly if it's greater than 2, right? But if it's greater than 1 and you're eligible for that new version of IBR, then use save, right? Then plan to switch to that new version of IBR if you're projected to reach forgiveness, and that version of IBR or pay as you earn will have you paying less than save has you paying. And you'll see that in the simulator, like we saw in this particular case, right? We can see this will track where you are in repayment. If you were to switch plans, what the consequences of that would be, what those monthly payments would be. Here we see that the lowest projected total cost is this new version of IBR. Because I'm eligible for it, what that tells me is that I should switch to save when I'm next due to renew, use it for up to 5 years, come back to IBR 2014. So I'm still on that 15-year forgiveness time frame. I will have the lowest projected total cost if I do that, and it'll be less than this. I can't wait until we can show you what that number is exactly. It's going to be a little while yet, maybe before the end of the year, maybe in the early 2024, but it will be less than this, right? Because the payment will be lower, you're making lower monthly payments, the interest accrual will be lower because SAVE comes with 100% unpaid interest subsidy for those 5 years, right? So this will be lower. If I'm not eligible for the new version of IBR, that's where pay as you earn comes in, right? So I might want to stick with pay as you earn or get into pay as you earn before it's phased out, right? But some of the simulations we've been running, depending on where you are, depending on what your life is doing and your income's doing, right? Sometimes save can be better than pay as you earn, right? It's not a slam dunk that if you're in pay now that you should stay in pay, right? I thought it would be, right? Running the simulations, I was kind of surprised to see how often switching to save will actually be better, which puts you into what I've been calling the pickle, right? Because in order to get that lower cost, you actually have to be okay with paying longer, right? Because pay as you earn has a 20-year maximum repayment period, save has a 25-year. Right now, the simulator is going to show you in a lot of cases that save is going to be better, even with those additional 5 years of payments. That's how beneficial save can be, right? So that's a tough one, right? Not everybody wants to be in repayment forever. And if you want to be in repayment for a shorter period of time, reach forgiveness sooner under a plan like Pay, even if you end up paying a little bit more, that's fine, right? Just know that that's the case for you, right? But if you want to switch to save and you're cool with being in repayment for 5 years longer, there's no harm in switching either. Just know that you're going to lose access to pay as you earn after July 1st of 2024, hence the pickle, right? That's a tough one to work through. If you're not eligible for pay as you earn, use save, right? Because that puts you in the bucket that my wife and I are in, right? It's either IBR 2009, old IBR, or save. Save wins every day. Right now, you may have a really low IBR payment, keep that until your next due to renew, but eventually everybody needs to get out of IBR 2009 and into save. It's going to be the most beneficial plan going forward. The other variable that's really important here that's hard to answer is how much forgiveness time do you have? Right? That's where that student loan physical exam is so important. And this is driving people nuts, right? And in 2024, we should all have a piece of data that's in this student aid data file that we're going to put front and center somewhere on this page that says how many years you have eligible towards forgiveness, which means we can tell you when you're going to hit forgiveness or how many years you have left in repayment. Right now, it's kind of a guess, right? Best guess, start with your graduation date from vet school, right? So 2018 is 2023. We've got 5 years of qualifying forgiveness time at least. Right now, if you're one of those folks that have some older loans and you had some time in between veterinary school and you've consolidated them all together, that's a harder question to answer. That was kind of that example, that theoretical I walked through. Let's say this person still had these loans and they consolidated them all together. They might have an additional 2 years of qualifying forgiveness time. So I would take 5 plus 2, 7 years, right? I would add that 7 years to my repayment simulations to give me the best guess of what that's going to do to my simulation. But these years in repayment is one of the most significant variables in here, right? Not so much how much debt you have or how much unpaid interest or even your income. The years in repayment is one of the biggest factors in when you run these simulations. The closer you are to forgiveness, and these income-driven plans have been around long enough now, when we have a lot of people that are knocking on the door of forgiveness, is not too far off, right? You want to know when that's going to happen and what those consequences might be for you. But that also plays a role in here. All right, so let's look at some of the other diagnostics we can do. How much forgiveness time do you have? It's a little bit of a guess. Start with your graduation year, work back from there. If you've got some eligible repayment time, I mean, a lot of us are career changers. I was a career changer. I was kind of like this other person, though, where I ended up paying off my loans. So I don't have the option. I paid off my loans from undergrad. I don't have the option of consolidating those older loans. It's kind of too bad when I look at it now. I'd be really, really close to forgiveness, right? Because I had, I don't know, probably a 7 or 8 year window from the time between my undergrad loans and when I started borrowing for vet school. I could have added that to my forgiveness time frame. I'm looking at forgiveness, 6 or 7 years down the road as opposed to 14 years. Right, so that's where that one-time forgiveness count adjustment, which we're going to talk about in just a minute here. Which income-driven plans are you eligible for? We covered that. That's the income-driven repayment eligibility tab after you upload your My Student Loans, upload your file in the My Student Loans tool. Math check your current payment versus what your loan servicer is showing you, right? This is why this is so valuable, right? Upload your student aid data file is one of the only objective ways that you can math check your loan servicer. Take full advantage of it because they screw stuff up all of the time, right? So I see a $391 payment here, right? If I'm not seeing that in my loan servicer portal, then why is that, right? This is where I've discovered the error on my loan servicer's end. My monthly payment was showing one thing. When I got my letter, when I logged into my loan servicer account, it was showing something else. And it was a higher number, and it shouldn't have been, right? So I had to go through this rigmarole of uncovering what were they using to calculate my payment, right? And I could never figure it out. So I submitted income documentation again until the Department of Education showed me the payment that I should have had, submitted that information, talked my loan servicer into an administrative forbearance while that processes, and now I have another 2 months of zero payment until that new payment kicks in December. Right, it's a lot of work, but it's going to help save a significant, probably 30% on my monthly payment over the next 12 months, right? And it's going to help to make sure that I'm still on track to hit forgiveness for those 2 months that they're working through that administrative forbearance period. That's just kind of there is no set it and forget it anymore, particularly right now. When it comes to calculating your payment, right? I mean, you're going to look at this, you're going to be like, wait a minute, this is probably from a 2019 tax return. I've filed a couple of new ones since then. My income's higher, hopefully, right? My payment should be a lot higher. That's okay. Let's benefit from it for nearly another year and think about what my tax return is going to look like in 2023 when I renew then, right? That's what my payment will be based on. Now, if this payment is a higher number and something has happened between now and when you filed that last tax return, maybe you can have a lower payment, right? In which cases you might want to go through the process of recertifying your income or even switching repayment plans to get that lower payment now that payments have started back up. Those anniversary dates, right? Just because payments have started back up doesn't necessarily mean that you have to provide income documentation. The income documentation is only needed if you can get a lower payment or if you're due to renew. And nobody is due to renew until at least 6 months after payments have restarted, which was this month. So nobody is due to provide any income documentation, regardless of what your loan servicer says, until March of 2023. That's the earliest, unless you see something else in your file that could be later. There are some people that have anniversary dates into 2025, just based on how they kept pushing them out from the pandemic forbearance benefits. This is particularly for recent grads that follow our recommendations to graduate, consolidate, use a tax return from when they're a fourth-year student to get a $0 payment. Some of them are going to have $0 payments for nearly 5 years before they have a payment that's greater than zero because of the pandemic forbearance benefit, right? Which has been hugely beneficial and makes it much more likely that you're going to hit forgiveness, regardless of what your income's doing. Right? So know what those anniversary dates are and how that impacts your overall repayment strategy. And that's where that simulation comes in. So important to put those number of years that you have logged in repayment into that simulation. Here, I increased this years in repayment by 2 years, right? In our theoretical scenario, right? Let's run that simulation and see what it does, like how it drops our total projected repayment costs, right? And before, and that was presuming, I think, that I had $20,000 on hand for forgiveness. I had a $307,000 projected cost, right? If I have 2 years of additional forgiveness time in there, I've dropped it by another $30,000, right? Tens of thousands of dollars. $30,000 in that case is what the value of that additional 2 years of forgiveness time is, right? Which is what makes this one-time forgiveness count adjustment so beneficial, right? And let's jump ahead to that, right? So this one-time forgiveness count adjustment, right? So this is still in place. It's been in place since 2020, late 2021, right? Basically, we're counting any repayment time and certain periods of deferment and forbearance time as forgiveness eligible. Right. And we got some guidance in the last year or so because there was a lot of questions that came up. What if I consolidate loans that have different amounts of forgiveness eligible time? Well, the guidance on that says we're going to credit you with the highest number on that consolidation loan. Whatever loans were included in that consolidation that have the highest amount of repayment time, including some of this deferment and forbearance time, we're going to count that as forgiveness qualifying time. Right. So they're giving forgiveness time out like candy right now. Right. So if you can get extra forgiveness time, get it. It might require you to consolidate. If you've already consolidated all of your loans, then you just have to wait and see what that count is when they apply it in 2024. Right. If you're not sure, again, reach out to Becca and I. You can, upload your student aid data file and post to the student debt message board area, and we can walk through that with you. The closer you can get to that 20 or 25 years of forgiveness, the sooner you're going to be done with your student loans, the less you're going to pay. Right? That forgiveness time is crazy beneficial, right? And you have to, if you do need to consolidate to max that benefit, right, to get that maximum amount of qualifying forgiveness time, you have to submit that consolidation before the end of this year, right? And we're running out of time, right? It's taking 30 to 60 days for them to process a consolidation. So even if you hit the consolidation button tomorrow, it's probably not going to come through until the end of the year, which means if something didn't go right, you don't have any grace period to fix it, right? So this is the time to do this, is to look at your loans, make sure that if you need to consolidate, get that consolidation done as soon as possible so you can get that maximum benefit before that forgiveness count adjustment is applied. This is also what has been triggering forgiveness for hundreds of thousands of people already, right? Again, they don't care which repayment plan you've been using, right? Any repayment plan. So people that graduated in the early 2000s or even in the late 1990s have been receiving forgiveness based on this one-time forgiveness count adjustment. And that's what this represents. 800,000 people have seen their loans forgiven. And because that tax exemption is in place, they don't have to pay any federal income taxes on that forgiven amount, right? And more people will keep seeing forgiveness as that count is applied and adjusted going forward here, right? So that tax exemption is going to be really beneficial for a lot of those folks. So how much longer do you have until you reach forgiveness? Your My Student Loans summary is going to show you that. Hopefully this will actually answer that question about whether or not when to not consolidate, right? And really, these are the times that you should consolidate. Not consolidate if your loans are already consolidated. Now that can be a little bit tricky because you can have failed consolidation loans, but you need to consolidate those failed consolidation loans into a new direct consolidation loan, right? So if your loans are not consolidated, right, chances are there's a really beneficial reason for you to do that, right? But there might not be if there's nothing for you to gain. Right, and it's hard to list out every instance there where that could be the case, but here are a lot of the reasons to consolidate. These top 3 ones are for people that are in repayment. These bottom 2 ones are more for people that are still students or just approaching graduation. Yeah, so anybody eligible to consolidate there are students and very new grads. This just kind of puts a bow on that renewal date stuff that I was talking about, right? Nobody is due to provide renewal information sooner than 6 months since the payment started back up, right? Which puts us into March of 2024, right? So whatever your anniversary date says in your file, you should be able to add a year to it until you get beyond March of 2024. Now, I've seen a lot of the newer files have actually updated the dates, which has been great, right? So there's 2024 dates or 2025 dates listed in there. Those are usually pretty accurate, right? So if you grab a newer file, you can see this file is a little dated here. If you grab a newer file, you might see that that anniversary date has already been pushed out a year. It's nice to get that confirmation and then also log into your loan servicer account to see if they're showing you the same thing you're seeing in your file. Do not defer your loans, right? So we were in this very special pandemic forbearance benefit period. That was a really special exception, right? And that was technically a forbearance, right? But if you forbear or defer your loans into the future, interest is going to accumulate. That interest will be capitalized, means it gets added to your principal. The higher your principal, the more interest accrues. You don't want to use deferment, right? If you have a decrease in your income for any reason, submit to have your payment lowered. It could be all the way down to 0, right? So it's the same thing as a deferment or forbearance, except you get forgiveness credit, right? And you prevent the unpaid interest from capitalizing, right? So public service announcement, colleagues don't let other colleagues defer their student loans. What do you do if you already updated your income and it's much higher than 2020? Can you call and ask them to take it back? Ooh, probably not. This has been one of the reasons why people are seeing higher payments in their student loan portal than they might see in their file, right? Because what they see in their file is kind of what the payments were based on when you entered the forbearance period. And if you provided updated income information during the forbearance period, they were supposed to ignore it. But it turns out they've been keeping that information on file. And when they went back to calculate people's payments, they were going and looking at whatever the most recent income information was that they had on file. So if you submitted income information between, when you entered the forbearance period and now, they're going to use that most recent income information, and you're probably not going to get them to take it back. I think they should be taking it back, but they're not, right? And it's really hard to get them to stop unless you have some newer income information that can produce a lower monthly payment. You're kind of stuck with that one until you're next due to renew, or you could switch to a plan like Save if it makes sense for you to do so. Good question. All right, let's talk about marriage. It's complicated, right? So when you're married, if your spouse has student loans and you file your taxes jointly, they will factor your spouse's student loan balance into your monthly payment and how they allocate those payments, right? They'll basically consider you a single unit, right? They're going to add your loans together. They're going to add your taxable incomes together. They're going to come up with a household monthly payment based on your family size and that taxable income and your discretionary income, the plans that you're using, and then they're going to apply those payments proportionally based on the percentages of the loan balance that you each hold. Right. So in my case, my wife has about 60% of the household debt. I have about 40%. So 40% of the payment goes to our loans. 60% goes to her loans, right? That's the case if you're filing jointly and you both have student loans. If only you have the student loans and you file jointly, they're still going to count your spouse's income, which means the payment's just going to be higher, right? Now you have the option for any of the plans, right? It was complicated before because Repay, the predecessor to Save, didn't allow you to separate your spouse's income out even if you filed separately. But if you file your recent tax return separately, then you can separate out your spouse's income. You don't have to include it. They may still ask you for it, and if you provide it, they shouldn't use it when they calculate your payment, right? But if your most recent tax return is a married filing separately tax return, they should not be counting your spouse's income in the calculation, right? So make sure you're math checking that loan servicer so your payment is correct when they update that payment for you. Unfortunately, the tax benefits incentivize you to get married, file jointly, have children, but the student loan incentives incentivize you to not get married or file your taxes separately and still have children, right? So you're going to pay extra in taxes. You're going to lose some tax filing benefits when you file separately. However, depending on your circumstances, usually you're going to more than make up for that in a lower monthly payment. Right, so you have to kind of do that cost benefit analysis, and it can change from year to year in terms of whether you should do that or not, right? So, and you could change your tax filing status every year, right? You can even go back in time and update a separate tax return to a joint tax return, which may make a lot of sense for a lot of you if you were filing separately during the forbearance benefits and we didn't have to provide income information. Right, that's something you're going to want to visit with your accountant, but you do have those options, right? And in the simulator, when you use family information, right, so we can add a spouse in here, we're going to ask you, how did you file your taxes, your most recent taxes, right? If it's separately, then we'll exclude your spouse's income, right? But if it's jointly, then we'll include it, right? And you'll see what that does to the projected student loan repayment costs. We can't tell you exactly those cost differences for you on a tax basis, right? That's something you're going to have to visit with your accountant on, right? But we can show you the cost differences in your monthly student loan payments and your projected total costs. So you can, compare that against what your accountant tells you are the tax consequences of filing separately. So it takes a little bit of a team. If you do live in a community property state, right, so California, Texas, those are the biggies. most of them are along the West Coast there, and then kind of wrap around the South a little bit into Louisiana. But from a population standpoint, that's California, Texas. I think there's 13 of them. But if you live in one of those community property states, when you file your taxes separately, you have an additional option of income information you can use for your income-driven plans, which makes it even more beneficial, right? So people who live in community property states have an additional layer, additional advantage, if you will, when it comes to those income-driven plans in terms of getting a lower monthly payment than they otherwise would for somebody who's filing separately, say in a non-community property state. So that's also something that you can visit with your accountant on. It all hinges on what is the number that hits your adjusted gross income line item on that particular tax return compared to what your pay stubs show as your taxable income. You want to use the lowest one, right? The lowest one, that's what the rules allow. That's going to help you pay less towards your student loans. You have more in your budget to put towards other things. Any additional questions that I missed in the chat or anything? Let me see.
There was another question here for our students in the room. Can students consolidate loans, or do we have to wait until we start repayment?
Yeah, you can't consolidate your loans while you're in school. So you have to wait until you officially enter your grace period. And that can, usually that happens a day after you graduate. For some reason, and for some people and for some schools, it can take up to a month or more, right? So it really depends upon when your loans show a grace period status, then you can officially include them in a consolidation loan. And it's actually a good thing. They used to let you consolidate your loans in school, and it really makes for a mess. So yeah, don't try that. It's not gonna work very well. Top mistakes that I see, if you can benefit from a consolidation, is procrastination, right? And this is kind of where Becca and I have been, busier than we can handle lately. Is as soon as the pandemic forbearance benefits were winding down and everybody kind of came out of the woodwork at once, and they want to know if they need to consolidate. And it's hard to tell everybody and look at everybody's student loans all at once, right? So we have to, hopefully from this information, you can get an idea if you need to consolidate, right? But we're kind of running out of time. So we still have quite a backlog that we're working through on the student debt message board area. So we might not be able to answer that question immediately for you. Hopefully we can get you an answer before the end of this year here. But it's, you're going to have to do a little bit of that legwork using some of this information that we're sharing with you today, right? So yeah, if you've kind of waited until the end here to look at your student loans, there's consequences to that, right? And it would have been better to do it earlier, but if you are where you are and it still makes sense for you to consolidate, you do still have some time between now and the end of the year. I do still see people who start with the income-based repayment plan. I think it's because we talk about income-based repayment so much instead of income-driven repayment, that when people apply for their plan, they check the income-based repayment option. It is almost never the best plan to start with, right? We talked about potentially switching from SAVE to the new version of IBR in the future, but it doesn't really make sense for anybody to be in the new version of IBR right now, right? And if you're in the old version of IBR, you want to get your loans into SAVE as soon as it makes sense for you to do that, right? So IBR, if you see IBR as your repayment plan, then you want to, raise an eyebrow and start looking at, is there something that makes more sense for me in the short and long term? Forbearance, deferment, going forward, missing renewals, right? That anniversary date, you generally have to provide that information at least 10 days before that anniversary date. They open up the window of opportunity for you to renew about 60 days before that anniversary date, right? That's when you want to start getting that income documentation in. If you miss renewals, it's a whole mess, right? So don't miss those renewal period windows. It's going to be confusing as we get started in repayment, particularly with those anniversary dates that got pushed out into the future. But that's why you do sessions like this. That's why you attend them. You look at what your anniversary shows, put that date into your calendar and set a dozen reminders so it annoys the crap out of you until you actually submit that income documentation. Your loan servicer should send you that information too, but don't rely on them to remind you, right? You're going to have to just remind yourself. Putting student loans ahead of your critical financial wellness areas, right? This is particularly relevant to students and new grads. Everybody wants to come out of the vet school guns blazing, put their signing bonus towards their student loans, and they forget about all of these other more beneficial areas that are going to pay way bigger dividends in the long run, right? So pace yourself, right? Get your payment to be as low as possible, buy you some time, learn what your new budget's going to be, start building that financial wellness strategy that will incorporate your student loans, but it shouldn't only be about your student loans. Abandoning income-driven plans because of the forgiveness tax, right, or for other reasons, right? I mean, they tend to be really, really beneficial, right? So it doesn't often make sense to hit the eject button on those in most cases. All right, let's put a bow on this with the financial wellness, and we'll finish up with any extra questions that you guys have. Here are some of those critical financial wellness items that I think are non-negotiables, right? Building an emergency fund. Target 3 to 6 months of your expenses, right? Which means you got to know what those expenses are, right? And I've been collecting information for a while now. The numbers around budgeting are not good. Right. And I didn't expect them to be, right? Finance is not something that people, generally have a love of, right? So, and budgeting falls into that category, right? But this has got to change, right? If you can't manage what you don't measure, you have to build a budget. You have to know what your major monthly ins and outs are so you can set a reasonable target for your emergency fund, start a dedicated emergency fund. That's 3 to 6 months of those average major monthly expenses. Put that out of sight, out of mind in a high yield savings account. That's separate from your forgiveness savings plan. That's separate from your home down payment fund, your practice starting buy-in fund, your vacation fund. Open different accounts for all of those. If you put them all into one fund, you don't have an emergency fund, you have a slush fund. Right, which means you don't really have an emergency fund. Right, so you have to separate these things out, and it's easy to do. Interest is a thing again, right? You can earn interest on savings, which is great. It sucks that inflation comes with that, but those two kind of go hand in hand. So separate those things out, but manage those ins and outs so you can make some educated assessments on what those amounts should be. I see a lot of people, the ones that, and this is very subjective, someday we'll maybe put a study on this, but in the student debt income signalment forms that people submit, the ones that have some of the more negative, dreary tones are the ones that say they're not tracking their income and expenses, which means they're just kind of winging it, right? Which makes it really hard to know how much should I be paying towards my student loans versus saving for retirement versus buying a home or, paying off other credit card debt and other things like that. It just makes the whole process that much more stressful. So a good budget really helps to make that a lot easier to navigate. Retirement savings. Rule of thumb, start saving 10 to 15% of your gross income, ideally in tax advantage savings accounts like 401ks, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, SEP IRAs, whatever your employer might be offering for you to help take advantage of that, especially if they're offering a match. That's free money. Do not forego whatever the maximum is you need to contribute to receive that maximum employer contribution. Right, so max out that, at least work up to 10% of your gross, if not 15. Try to hit the IRS target amounts, the maximum amounts you contribute to those types of accounts. Like a 401k is $22,500 for 2023. See if you can hit that target, right? And that doesn't count what your employer can put on top of that, right? So you can really jumpstart those retirement funds in those tax advantage accounts if you're trying to max out those contributions. Pay off credit card debt, less flexible debt, private loans, other debt first. Your student debt balance might be a bigger number, but this stuff is more dangerous, right? Pay this stuff down sooner build an emergency fund so you can stay out of that credit card debt. You know, it doesn't really pay to carry credit card debt. Credit card interest rates are in the high 20% right now, right? So that stuff's brutal. That can get out of control really quickly. You know, and I've seen an uptick of this with students particularly. So I know, you know, inflation's been a bear. Maybe the amounts that they're offering to cover your living expenses haven't, you know, matriculated through the amounts that they offer you in student loans, but the same kind of concepts apply. Build a budget. It can be harder to do as a student because you don't have a lot of ins, you have mostly outs, but your student loans serve to offset those expenses as well. It's better to take more in student loans, even if the interest rates are 7%, than using a credit card to cover the difference when it's at 25%. Right? So use those student loans to cover those living expenses, build a budget to know exactly how much living expense amounts that you actually have. Things that you don't add in your budget are not likely to happen, right? If you want to buy a home, you want to buy into a practice, you want to start a practice, put those as dedicated line items in your budget. Start building a fund that's dedicated to those items, right? You'll be amazed at how fast those funds can build and then how easier it is to reach those milestones. If you're going to pay your student loans using an income-driven plan, if you're going to hit forgiveness, start a dedicated forgiveness fund. The earlier, the better. Enjoy life, right? This isn't about paying your student loans. Your student loans are just an ugly side effect of becoming a veterinarian, right? We can help you get that as a major source of stress out of the way so you can get back to doing the things that you love, including practicing and all of these other things that fall into financing life. You'll pay your student loans off. It's okay to make payments based on your income. Loan repayment will end. You will not be in repayment forever. You'll either hit forgiveness or you'll earn enough to pay the balance to zero, right? Forgiveness is going to depend on the strategy you choose or whether or not public service loan forgiveness is on the table for you, but loan repayment will end, and it'll end in a reasonable amount of time, considering how long it's taken you to get to be a veterinarian and how expensive it is, right? It's always kind of been one of those intriguing things to me where, you know, the data tells us that most veterinarians knew they wanted to be a veterinarian when they were 8 years old, and how many years it takes you to realize that goal. But yet we feel like we need to pay our student loans back in like 3 years, right? It's just not very realistic, right? And thankfully you don't have to do it that way. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't make financial sense to do it that way. It's just that we don't know exactly how to navigate those other pathways. And that's really what this is all about. If you anticipate reaching forgiveness, the earlier you start saving for that potential tax, the more flexibility you have, right? And don't forget about all of those financial wellness items. The sooner you can start those things, the better your future self is going to be, right? We have to avoid that station to station temptation where it's like, I have to get rid of my student loans before I can buy a home. Well, if it takes you 20 years to get rid of your student loans, it's going to be a long time for you to get a home, right? Same with retirement, right? I mean, all of these things have a time component. The sooner you start them, the better you're going to be in the future. If you need help, ask, right? And that's where Beck and I are here to help. Let me come back over to the Student Debt Center, the link to the Student Debt Message Board area. When you're logged in, you'll see that. This is what it looks like in here, right? So I know Paul's rounds are starting in like 5 minutes, so I'm gonna need to get this one over. So you'll see there's literally thousands of these posts in here. This is where all of this information comes from. You know, Beck and I go in here and we counsel our colleagues on the best repayment strategies for them to use based on their circumstances, right? And a lot of that follows along what we call the student debt and income signalment form. If you reach out for personalized assistance, you're going to fill out one of these forms as well. We post this anonymously to the message boards. It incorporates all of the information that we need, right? 2019 Cornell grad, $238,000 of student debt. They're using an extended 25-year plan with a payment of $1,500 a month, right? Looking at their income of $100,000, I can tell you right now that doesn't make a lot of sense to use a standard 25-year plan. But thankfully, they're going to get a rare do-over because this is going to count towards forgiveness. The 2, 3, 4 years that they've been in repayment since they graduated during the forbearance benefit period and the one-time forgiveness count adjustment, they're going to get a rare do-over, right? But after this year, doing this sort of stuff is not going to count towards forgiveness. You're just going to prolong the amount of time you're in repayment, and you're going to end up paying more than you have to. Right? We already know that this person is going to have a $600 or $700 a month payment, which is more than half of what they're paying now under a standard 25-year plan. Right? Most likely because they didn't know what their repayment options were. They want to know if they should consolidate. Right? So those are the things that we're going to walk through in this student debt income signalment form and the student debt message boards. You can see they are anonymous, right? Because we require a lot of personal financial information, right? So Beck and I know who you are, but the rest of the community won't. But the benefit of this, just like VIN and all of the medical discussions, we get to learn from each other's experience, which means we get to show you the good, bad, and ugly of how best to approach student loan repayment as things change over time. Any other questions before we leave you guys?
Couple of outstanding questions here in the Q&A. So if our monthly payments are currently $0, do you know if we can still sign up for auto pay through our loan servicers to get that 0.25% interest rate discount?
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for asking it. Right. So absolutely. So sign up for that auto pay, even if your payment is 0, right? You will get the 0.25% interest rate reduction.
And for those that are on ProSal and make half your income on production, do you think it makes more sense to recertify your income with taxes or with paychecks?
Yeah, so ProSal is an interesting, it depends on how often you're paid those bonuses. If you're paid them twice a year, then I would use those pay stubs. And if there's a good chance that your recertification date will fall within a window where you may not need to provide that bonus income in that income certification. So they will always accept your tax return. Your tax return is going to have those bonus payments in it, right? Everything that you earned in that tax year, right? When you provide paychecks or what's called other income information, that income information has to be from sources that are no more than 90 days old, right? So if you didn't receive that bonus in that 90-day period that you're providing that income information, then that bonus income won't be on that income documentation, right? So it often makes sense for people who are paid on production, particularly if it's not paid, monthly or every other month, then there is a good chance that that bonus payout won't show up in a 90-day period, which means your student loan payment will be a function more on your base pay rather than that production pay, which can fluctuate wildly. Same would be, if you received like a signing bonus, because those are kind of hot lately, right? So a retention bonus or something that doesn't over-represents what your current income is. That's a reason why you might not want to use that recent tax return, because it shows income that isn't regular for you, right? So in that case, you may want to use a pay stub that's in a 90-day period that doesn't show that, out those kind of one-time kind of payouts. Good question though. And that's been coming up a lot too for folks who receive owner payouts, right? So dividend payments as an owner. Again, it depends on the frequency of what those owner payments are, right? So if you receive them monthly, then you're going to have to report them because they're regular income. But if they were to change for any reason, maybe you're an owner and you have to, they cut the dividend because, the practice has slowed down a little bit, you can update your income information even if it's not time to renew. That's one good thing to know too about the income-driven plans. If your income decreases for any reason, you can immediately apply to have your payment decreased, right? They will always honor that if your income documentation will result in a lower payment. But if your income has increased, they'll just wait until you're next due to renew, right? So there's no reason to provide that income information if it just recently increased. They'll get that when you provide that income documentation on your next renewal, if that makes sense. For saving for the forgiveness tax, we've got a blog post on that. So if you go to vinfoundation.org and you look at our blog, or if you actually, the quickest way to get there is from the simulator. So in the forgiveness planning module, because that question comes up all the time, how do I save for the tax, right? We've got a blog post on that, things to think about. The key is to just get started. Right? If you're starting from zero, open up a high yield savings account that's dedicated to that. Go to a place like bankrate.com. You'll find the highest yielding online savings account that you can find. And once you have an amount that's in there that you're kind of looking at it and you're saying, I could probably do better than 4.5%. That's when you're ready to kind of take that next step. Right. And I've mentioned some of those things here. It's also good to, if you want some guided assistance on this stuff, certified financial planners are great for helping you reach those long-term targets, right? Like your retirement targets or like a tax that you might have to pay on forgiveness, right? But it really helps to know what that target is and what your tolerance for risk is so they can help craft a portfolio for you, right? Now, that's what the robo-advisors do too, but you have to have some, let's say, comfort level with doing this on your own if you're going to use the robo-advisors, because there's nobody to talk to, right? That's the value of paying a certified financial planner. You can bounce ideas off of them when it comes to those investing types of things. But yeah, great question. Anything else?
That's got our Q&A. Thanks so much, Tony.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Becca, for monitoring that. And I saw you answered some of those in there. We'll make sure that everybody gets a link to these slides as well. You'll notice there's some ones that I didn't get to on the financial wellness strategy section, or if you want to review anything that we cover, there's a lot of links to various resources that are baked into the presentation as well. So we'll send that out to you as soon as we get the recording processed and we're able to get that word out to you.